Picture this. It's 6 in the morning on a Monday. Someone is pounding on my door. They want to break it down. I open the door. Nobody there. Just HOA President Linda Harrison. She's hunched over, slapping a bright red paper on my front door. The paper is huge, size of a dinner plate. She turns around, this smug grin on her face, like she just won the lottery. You have 30 days to leave these premises. You violated HOA rules. This is an official eviction notice. Then she walks away, leaving me standing there, stunned. With a paper ordering me out. Out of the house my family lived in since 1962. At that moment, I had no idea. Linda just made the biggest mistake of her life. This story will show you what happens when you mess with the wrong person. Comment where you're watching from. So there I am. Standing in my pajamas at 6:15 am. Holding that red eviction notice. I felt like someone punched me in the gut. The paper looked official. Complete with legal words and a bright red violation stamped. According to this masterpiece, I violated Article 7.3. Structures not conforming to community standards, established at the March 2024 meeting. The funny thing? I never got notice of any March meeting. My house had been standing here since the Kennedy administration. I made coffee, started digging. Turns out the HOA changed 15 different rules. In the past 6 months. Every single change seemed designed. To target older homes in the neighborhood. New paint color requirements, landscaping mandates. Architectural guidelines that would have made my 1960s ranch house illegal to build today. It was like they were playing whack-a-mole. With anyone who didn't fit their cookie-cutter vision. My neighbor Tom Rodriguez knocked on my door. Around 9 a.m. Tom teaches high school history, has lived here for 10 years. He looked nervous, glancing around, like he was worried about being seen talking to me. "Mike, I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "You're not the first. 4 other families got similar notices in the past year. The Johnsons, the Martinez family, the elderly couple on Elm Street, and the single mom with 2 kids on Oak Avenue. They all sold their houses way below market value to some mysterious buyer who paid cash and closed fast. That got my attention. I asked Tom what he knew about this mysterious buyer. He shrugged. Nobody knows for sure, but word is it might be connected to Harrison Development. You know Brad Harrison, Linda's husband. The pieces were starting to come together, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. I spent the rest of Monday knocking on doors, talking to neighbors. What I found was a community divided. About 60% of residents had no idea about these rule changes. Many people supported me, but were terrified of becoming the next target. The lakefront homeowners, though, they were a different story. These folks paid $200,000 to $300,000 extra for lake access. Property values were their religion. Several of them made it clear they thought I should just comply or leave. That evening, I sat in the kitchen my grandparents had designed, looking at family photos spanning 3 generations. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about protecting family legacy, standing up to what felt like organized intimidation. My grandfather hadn't survived the Depression and built this place just so some power-hungry HOA president could push us around. Decided to check the old family documents. My grandparents were careful record keepers. I knew they saved everything in the basement safe. I found the combination taped inside my grandmother's recipe box, just where she always hid important things. The safe was full of old papers, birth certificates, property, documents dating back decades. Then I saw it. A thick folder labeled Property Deed Crystal Lake and Surrounding Lands, 1960. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were official documents, showing that my grandfather, William Thompson had purchased 150 acres in 1961, including Crystal Lake itself. The implications hit me like a freight train. If this was real, then every single lakefront house in this neighborhood was sitting on land that accessed a lake I technically owned. The next morning, I called John Mills, a retired lawyer who had been friends with my family for decades. Mills specialized in property law, had helped my grandfather with legal matters over the years. At 68, he was sharp as ever. Agreed to meet me immediately after I explained the situation. Mills examined the documents for 2 hours, cross-referencing them with county records and old surveys. "Mike, this is real," he finally said. "Your grandfather bought the entire area in 1961, when it was just undeveloped land around a small lake. Between 1975 and 1982, he sold off individual lots to families wanting to build homes. But he specifically kept ownership of Crystal Lake itself. The legal implications were staggering. Every deed for the lakefront homes mentioned lake access included, but none of them transferred ownership of the lake. For 40-plus years, the HOA and residents had simply assumed the lake was community property. They built docks, organized lake events, treated it like their personal playground, all while the actual ownership sat gathering dust in my basement safe. Mills introduced me to Jessica Martinez, a 28-year-old former HOA secretary who had been working as his assistant since Linda fired her 6 months earlier. Jessica had a story to tell, and it wasn't pretty. She discovered Linda forging signatures on voting records, changing meeting minutes after the fact. When Jessica tried to report it, Linda accused her of being incompetent. Had her fired immediately. "Linda isn't working alone," Jessica explained. "She takes orders from her husband, Brad. He's been systematically targeting older homes for months. The goal is to force sales, buy properties cheap, and redevelop the entire area. I have documents showing Brad's company purchased the 4 houses Tom mentioned, all for 30 to 40% below market value." Mills warned me about the legal realities. A court battle could take 2 to 3 years, cost $50,000 to $100,000. Meanwhile, the HOA could continue fining me $500 per day, which would bankrupt me long before any legal victory. Jessica suggested we gather more evidence before making moves, but time was running out fast. That afternoon, Linda called me directly. Her voice was ice-cold and professional, the kind of tone she'd probably used to intimidate other residents. "Mr. Thompson, I trust you've reviewed the eviction notice carefully. Tomorrow evening at 7 p.m., we're holding an emergency HOA meeting to address your situation. I strongly suggest you attend, as this will be the last time I'm willing to discuss this matter civilly." The threat was clear. Show up and surrender, or face the full legal and financial might of the HOA. What Linda didn't know, was that I was no longer the confused homeowner, who had answered his door in pajamas 2 days earlier. I had a secret weapon she couldn't possibly have anticipated, and I was about to change the rules of this game permanently. The emergency HOA meeting was held at the community center. It felt like walking into a courtroom, where I was already convicted. 60 people packed the room, more than had attended any HOA meeting in years. Linda had prepared a professional PowerPoint presentation, titled The Mike Thompson Problem, complete with photos of my house. And a detailed breakdown of all my supposed violations. For 20 minutes. Linda painted me as a selfish troublemaker who refused to follow community standards and was dragging down property values for everyone. She showed before and after photos of the 4 families who had voluntarily relocated, demonstrating how much better the neighborhood looked without non-conforming structures. The audience was eating it up, especially the lakefront owners, who saw their property investments as sacred. Linda finished her presentation. I asked for 10 minutes to respond. The room went silent. As I stood up and walked to the front, had prepared my materials, including copies of the property deed and a legal opinion from Mills confirming its validity. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to share some information that might change your perspective on this situation. I explained the history of Crystal Lake ownership, showing them the original 1961 deed and the subsequent sales records. The room erupted as people realized what this meant. Every lakefront homeowner had paid premium prices for lake access that was never legally theirs to purchase. The HOA had been collecting fees and making rules about property it didn't own or control. Linda's face went through several shades of red as she tried to maintain control. This is ridiculous, she shouted. Mr. Thompson is engaging in extortion, attempting to terrorize this community with frivolous legal claims. But the damage was done. Half the room was shouting questions about their property rights. The other half was demanding answers from Linda about how this situation had been allowed to develop. Brad Harrison, Linda's husband, had been sitting quietly in the back until this moment. He stood up. All 6'4" inches of him. His voice cut through the chaos like a sword. Who the hell do you think you are? Threatening this entire community? I will personally destroy you in court. And when I'm done, you won't have a dime left to your name. I looked directly at Brad and said calmly, I'm the person who owns the lake that 47 of these houses depend on for their property values. Tomorrow morning I'll be installing signs around the entire perimeter to make my ownership clear to everyone. The meeting collapsed into chaos after that. People were shouting. Some families walked out supporting me. Others surrounded Linda, demanding explanations. Tom Rodriguez and 12 other families announced they were withdrawing from the HOA if Linda didn't resign immediately. They formed what they called the Fairness Coalition and promised to support my legal rights. Sarah Kim, a freelance journalist who covered local government corruption, had been live streaming the meeting on the local news Facebook page. The video got 5,000 views in 2 hours. With comments split 50-50ths between supporting my property rights and condemning me for disrupting the community. The story was going viral. And there was no turning back. That night, I called All Season Signs Company and placed an order. That would make tomorrow very interesting for everyone involved. 50 signs reading, private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. Game on 6 a.m. Tuesday. I met the professional survey team and sign installation crew at the lake perimeter. Tom Rodriguez and 15 members of the Fairness Coalitions showed up. To support me, while Sarah Kim arrived with her camera. To document the entire process. The survey confirmed the exact boundaries of my property, which included not just the lake, but also 10 feet of shoreline around the entire perimeter. Installing 50 property signs around Crystal Lake took 3 hours. It was like watching a neighborhood civil war unfold. In real time. By 8 a.m. Lakefront residents were coming outside. To see what was happening. Some approached angrily, demanding we stop. Others stood quietly, probably calculating how much money they had just lost. In property value. A few even approached me privately, asking if we could work out individual access agreements. The reaction was swift and dramatic. Linda organized a protest by 9 a.m., with 30 residents holding hastily made signs. reading, "Save Our Lake" and "Stop Property Theft." She called the police twice, demanding they arrest me for trespassing and destroying community property. Both times the officers reviewed my documentation and confirmed I had every legal right to post signs on my property. By noon, the story had exploded beyond our small community. Sarah Kim's article, "Local Man Claims Ownership of Entire Lake, Locks Out Neighbors," was picked up by regional news outlets. The comment sections were brutal. With people taking sides based on limited information. Some called me a greedy opportunist, taking advantage of legal loopholes. Others praised me for standing up to HOA, bullying. And protecting property rights. The most interesting development. Was the community fracture I hadn't anticipated. The Fairness Coalition grew to 25 families by evening. They started a Thompson support fund that raised $15,000 in 48 hours for my legal expenses. These were mostly older residents, teachers, retirees, and working-class families who saw my fight as their fight against an increasingly authoritarian HOA. Meanwhile, the lakefront owners were organizing their response. Several of them had lawyers on retainer. They were exploring legal options to challenge my deed through adverse possession claims. The argument was that 60 years of community use had effectively transferred ownership away from my family, regardless of what the original paperwork said. That evening, an anonymous offer arrived in my mailbox. $2 million cash for the lake. No questions asked. Close in 30 days. Mills advised me to seriously consider it, pointing out that this kind of money could set me up for life and eliminate all the stress and legal uncertainty. I was genuinely torn between easy money and fighting for principle. But then something happened that made my decision easier. Brad Harrison hired Keller and Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the state. To challenge my deed's validity. They filed papers claiming 60 years of adverse possession by the community invalidated my ownership. And they demanded immediate access restoration, pending a full legal review. That night, Sarah Kim called with news that changed everything. "Mike, I found something big. Brad's company has done the same scheme in Millbrook and Cedar Heights. Same pattern, same tactics, same results. Can we meet tomorrow morning? This is bigger than just your neighborhood." Sarah Kim's investigation revealed a pattern that made my stomach turn. Brad Harrison's Neighborhood Renewal Initiative had targeted 8 different communities over 5 years, always following the same playbook. First, his company would identify older neighborhoods. With valuable land and outdated housing. Then they would infiltrate HOA leadership, usually by getting wives or business partners elected. To key positions. Once they controlled the HOA, they would systematically change rules to target older homes, impose expensive compliance requirements, and fine homeowners into financial submission. When families couldn't afford the upgrades or legal fights, they would sell quickly to avoid bankruptcy. Brad's company would swoop in with cash offers, typically 30 to 50% below market value. Then demolish the older homes and build luxury developments. The scheme had displaced over 200 families across 5 years, generating approximately $50 million in profits. For Brad's network. Sarah had interviewed victims from 3 other communities. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to mine. Elderly couples forced from homes they'd lived in for decades. Young families bankrupted by legal fees. Entire neighborhoods transformed from diverse communities into exclusive enclaves for the wealthy. The most shocking revelation was about Linda Harrison herself. She wasn't the criminal mastermind I had assumed, but rather a victim who had been manipulated into becoming an accomplice. 3 years earlier, Brad's company had foreclosed on the home belonging to Linda's elderly parents, using technical violations and unpaid fees as justification. Linda had been forced to work for Brad. To pay off the debt and prevent her parents from losing everything. CNN picked up the story by Thursday. Lakegate scandals started trending on social media. The attention brought both support and harassment. My phone was ringing constantly, with interview requests. Legal advice, and angry calls from people. Who thought I was destroying a community for personal gain. Someone leaked my address online. I started getting threatening messages from strangers. Who had never been within 100 miles of Crystal Lake. Detective Ray Morrison, who had been quietly investigating after receiving multiple complaints about HOA practices, finally reached out to me directly. Mike, I need you to know, Brad Harrison has significant political connections in this county. The district attorney's office is under pressure to prosecute you for theft of community resources. I would seriously consider taking whatever settlement deal is on the table while you still can. The federal government was also taking notice. FBI agent Lisa Park. Who specialized in white-collar crime, had been tracking multi-state HOA fraud for months. My case provided missing pieces. To complete a much larger federal investigation into organized real estate fraud involving multiple developers and corrupt municipal officials. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where my grandparents were buried. Standing at their graves, I thought about why my grandfather had bought this land. In the first place, according to family stories, he wanted to protect the lake from development. And ensure it remained accessible to regular families, not just wealthy developers. He had sold the surrounding lots to young families, starting their lives, specifically retaining lake ownership. To prevent exactly what Brad Harrison was trying to do. As I was leaving the cemetery, I received an anonymous text message. Brad is planning something big for tomorrow's court hearing. I have proof of what he's doing. Meet me in Oak Street Diner, 11 p.m. Come alone. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. This was either the break I needed. Or the stupidest decision I would ever make. The person waiting for me at Oak Street Diner. Was David Chin, the 45-year-old son of my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Dendy. Chin. David worked as an IT contractor for various local businesses, including Harrison Development. He had been quietly collecting evidence for months because they hurt my mother and so many other families. Somebody needed to stop them. David's hands were shaking as he handed me a thumb drive containing files that would change everything. He had risked his job and possibly his safety. To gather this evidence, using his IT access to copy files. During routine maintenance visits to Harrison Development. The drive contained recorded phone calls between Brad and Linda, discussing how to fabricate violations for targeted properties. Spreadsheets tracking every family they planned to force out, with projected profits for each property, calculated down to the dollar. Email chains with city officials about changing zoning regulations. To benefit Harrison Development, including evidence of cash payments disguised as consulting fees. Most damaging of all. Was Brad's complete master plan. To convert the entire area around Crystal Lake. Into a luxury resort and golf course. The documents showed architectural renderings. Environmental impact studies that had been suppressed, and financial projections. $200 million in potential profits. From the complete redevelopment. David had also discovered Brad's timeline, which planned to have all original residents removed. Within 18 months, the evidence showed that Brad had planned to acquire the lake from me all along. Internal memos revealed that Harrison Development had researched my family's property ownership months before the first eviction notice. The eviction scheme was designed to pressure me into selling as a desperate seller at far below market value, just like they had done with the 4 other families. He had used identical tactics to acquire lakefront properties from previous owners, building his development piece by piece over several years, while flying under the radar of media attention. David also revealed something that explained Linda's behavior and made me almost feel sorry for her. She wasn't a willing participant, but rather a victim being coerced through financial manipulation and threats against her family. Brad had deliberately foreclosed on her parents' home using fabricated HOA violations, creating crushing debt and emotional leverage over her. Then he used her legitimate real estate background and community connections to legitimize his HOA takeover. Linda was trapped between protecting her family and participating in a scheme that hurt her neighbors, living in constant fear that Brad would destroy her parents if she refused to cooperate. Friday morning brought an emergency injunction hearing. That felt like the climax of a legal thriller. Brad arrived with a team of 5 lawyers from Keller and Associates, their black SUVs taking up half the courthouse parking lot. I had Mills, Jessica, and the moral support of 50 community members who packed the courtroom gallery like they were attending a championship game. Judge Patricia Williams, known for her no-nonsense approach to property disputes, listened to 3 hours of arguments about deed validity, adverse possession claims, and community rights. The tension in the courtroom was electric. As both sides presented their cases, Brad's legal strategy was to overwhelm the court with technicalities and procedural challenges, hoping to delay any resolution until media attention died down. And community pressure forced me to settle. His lawyers argued that my family's deed was invalid. Due to changes in county record keeping, that 60 years of community use. Had transferred ownership through adverse possession, and that my actions constituted extortion against the entire neighborhood. They painted me as a greedy opportunist, taking advantage of legal loopholes. To terrorize innocent families. Mills countered with David's evidence, playing audio recordings in open court. That made several jurors gasp audibly. We could hear Brad's voice clearly stating his intention to get rid of the old guard and make this community profitable. The spreadsheets showing calculated profits. From forced home sales were displayed on courtroom screens, making the systematic nature of the fraud undeniable. The hearing took a dramatic turn when Brad made his final offer in open court, clearly frustrated by how badly things were going for him. $5 million for the lake. All legal charges dropped, and you can keep your house, while allowing limited community access to the water. The catch was that limited access would include rights for his future resort development. It was a poison pill disguised as a generous settlement, and everyone in the courtroom could see through it. Judge Williams called for a 48-hour cooling-off period, during which both sides could reconsider their positions. She made it clear that she was concerned about the serious allegations of systematic fraud, and strongly advised Brad to consult with counsel about potential federal implications of this case. The way she emphasized federal implications sent a chill through Brad's legal team. That evening, the Fairness Coalition and Lakefront Residents. Held an emergency community vote. At the packed community center. The choice was stark. Fight together for justice and transparency, or accept the settlement. And hope. Brad kept his promises about limited development. Tom Rodriguez moderated the discussion. The debate was passionate but respectful. Several elderly residents spoke about not wanting to live in fear anymore, while young families worried about the financial cost of continued legal battles. The final vote was 38 families for fighting, 15 for settling. The community had chosen justice over money, even knowing it meant years of legal uncertainty and continued conflict. As I left the community center that night, I felt the weight of representing not just my own family's legacy, but the hopes of hundreds of families who had been displaced by Brad's schemes. Across multiple communities. Tomorrow would determine whether ordinary people could still fight back against systematic corruption and win, or whether money and political connections would triumph over truth and justice. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors to my door. FBI Agent Lisa Park and Detective Morrison arrived with news that changed everything. The Bureau had been investigating Brad Harrison for 8 months, based on complaints from other communities. My case provided the missing pieces. To complete a federal prosecution for organized real estate fraud. Agent Park explained that David Chun's evidence, combined with victim testimony from multiple states, showed a clear pattern of federal crimes, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Brad's network included 3 other developers and corrupt city officials in 2 states, with total fraud value exceeding $50 million, affecting over 200 families. The most dramatic development. Was Linda Harrison's decision. To cooperate fully with federal authorities. Faced with the choice between federal prison and testifying against her husband, Linda chose to reveal everything she knew about Brad's operations. Her testimony would be crucial because she had direct knowledge of the financial arrangements. Political corruption and systematic targeting of vulnerable families. Monday morning's court session was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Brad arrived expecting another day of legal maneuvering, only to find FBI agents waiting with federal arrest warrants. As Agent Park read charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering, Brad's expensive lawyers could only watch helplessly. His final desperate move was claiming that everything had been Linda's idea, and he was an innocent victim of his wife's schemes. The courtroom erupted when Brad was arrested. While trying to present his defense, federal agents seized his laptop, which contained additional evidence of fraud schemes and development across 3 more states. Linda, sitting in the witness section, finally broke down and began crying as she watched her husband being led away in handcuffs. Judge Williams addressed the packed courtroom with a statement that would be quoted in news coverage for weeks. This case represents far more than a property dispute between neighbors. It exposes systematic abuse of community governance structures to defraud honest families of their MLS, homes, and life savings. The court finds clear evidence of an organized criminal enterprise designed to exploit legal loopholes and intimidate vulnerable residents. 6 months later, Brad Harrison was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Linda received 18 months with credit for cooperation and community service requirements. A $15 million restitution fund was established to compensate victims across all affected communities, with priority given to elderly residents and families who had lost their homes. The question of Crystal Lake's future remained. After extensive community input and legal consultation, I announced my decision. to establish the Thompson Community Trust. The lake would remain privately owned by my family, but open for community use, under environmental protection guidelines. Most importantly, the trust document specifically prohibited any commercial development, ensuring Brad's resort dreams could never be revived. The community transformation was remarkable. Jessica Martinez started a non-profit legal aid organization, specifically for HOA abuse victims, providing free assistance to families facing similar situations. Sarah Kim won a state journalism award for her investigative series and continued exposing municipal corruption across the region. Tom Rodriguez was elected as the new HOA president, with a mandate for complete transparency and community involvement in all decisions. Mrs. Chen, now 82, was honored as a community elder, and the Lake Pavilion was renamed the Chen Family Community Center, in recognition of her family's role in exposing the fraud. Her son David became an IT security consultant, helping other communities detect and prevent similar fraud schemes before they could cause widespread damage. Perhaps the most satisfying irony was what happened to Brad's luxury resort plans. The city acquired his corporate headquarters building and development plans through asset forfeiture, then converted them into an affordable housing project and community center. The same land he had schemed to turn into exclusive luxury accommodations now provided homes for working families and public services for the entire region. 12 months after that first eviction notice appeared on my door, Crystal Lake hosted its first annual Thompson Family Day. Over 200 people attended, including families from other communities who had been helped by the legal precedent we established. I spent the afternoon teaching kids about environmental protection and the importance of standing up for community values, just like my grandfather had envisioned when he first bought this land. The final lesson was clear. My grandfather had purchased this property to protect community values and ensure the lake remained accessible to regular families. It turned out that protecting a community sometimes requires trusting that community to fight back against those who would exploit and divide it. Individual courage combined with community solidarity and institutional justice can defeat even the most systematic oppression. Today, the Thompson Community Trust serves as a model for communities nationwide dealing with HOA abuse and predatory development schemes. I regularly consult with other towns facing similar challenges, helping them understand their legal rights and organize effective resistance. The lake my grandfather protected continues to serve families just as he intended, proving that ordinary people can still win against powerful interests when they stand together for what is right. If this story inspired you to stand up for your community or gave you hope that justice can still prevail, please hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue exposing corruption and celebrating the everyday heroes who refuse to back down when facing impossible odds. The fight for community justice never ends.